Okay, so our game is looking pretty good so far. So in this video, we're going to try to make a black fade animation so we can transition from one scene to the other with a smooth and nice effect. So to implement this behavior, what we first need to do is that we need to create a new sprite in the hierarchy. So we're gonna go to our sprites folder and we're gonna look for this black square and we're going to drag it to the hierarchy like this. We're gonna change the name to black fade. So the name is now black fade, and what we're going to do is that we have to resize it. So let's press T and let's resize the black fade like this. As you can see, the black fade does not appear in front of the ground and in front of the title and the bird. This is because of the layer that this black fade is in. If you take a look at the sorting layer, it's in the default layer. So let's create a new layer for the effects. So hit the plus button and let's create a new layer called effects. Now if we select our black fade, we can select the new layer that we have created. So now everything looks fine. So now what we want to do is that when we start the game, we want to fade out of this black fade, of this black sprite, into our scene. Okay, so to do this, we're going to select our black fade and select our animation window and hit create. And now that we have hit create, we can create a new animation. So go to assets, animations, and in here create a new folder called black fade. And go inside the folder and call this animation, for example, let's call it fade out, because we're going to fade out. Alright, so we have this animation going on. So now we can press the recording button, and any change that we make to this game object is gonna appear here. So what we're going to do is that we're going to click here in the sprite render component in the color field, and we're going to play with the transparency of the black fade. So in the beginning, we want the black fade to be completely black, and you can see that I have specified the value, and you can see that a keyframe has appeared here with the corresponding value. So at 0, 0 we want it to be black, and at 0, 1 for example, let's make it transparent. So at this, so remember to move the white line. Remember to move this white line to wherever. So we're moving it at 0.1. Now select the color and select the alpha to completely transparent. So now we hit play, you can see that it's actually a little bit fast. So we can drag this keyframe a little bit further, maybe 0.20. Okay, that's pretty good. But now if we go to our animator view, so in our animation window, we can click the record button and get out of the recording mode. Now let's go back to our animator window, and we can see that when we start the game, the fade out animation is going to play because it goes from entry. The transition goes from entry to fade out. So if we double click on this fade out animation, we can see here in inspector that it says loop time and the box is checked. This means that this animation will play in a loop. For the bird, we wanted the animations of the bird to be in a loop, but for this black fade, we only want to do it once. So uncheck this box. So when this animation plays, it's only going to play once. So now if we go back to animation, make sure that the white line is here. And what we're going to check, we're going to go to the animator window and we're going to press play and see what happens. As you can see, when we press play, the fade out animation plays only once. So it doesn't play many times. We don't want it to play many times. We only want it to play once. Alright, so we achieved that. Now what we want to achieve is that when we enter the menu scene, if we hit play, we want a fade in transition. So the screen becomes black, and then when the screen becomes black, we actually go to the next scene. So we press play, nothing happens. So we want it to do it smoothly, not abruptly like this. So to do it like that, we need to create a new animation. So we're going to select our black fade object, and we're going to go to the animation window, and here where it says fade out, we're going to click here and create a new clip. So inside the assets, animations, black fade folder, we're going to create a new animation for the black fade. This animation, we're going to call it fade in. So we're going to save, and now this is a new animation that we can create. If you click here, you can see both animations, and you can create as many animations as you want for a game object. In this case, we only need to fade in and fade out. And now we are going to define how the fade in is going to work. So for the fade in, it's going to be similar to the fade out, but the other way around. So let's click the recording button, and at the beginning we want the transparency to be equal to transparent. So we want the transparency to be equal to 0, and then at 0.20, for example, you can click here to move the white line wherever you want. So at 0.20, let's set the opacity or the transparency to 100 or 255. So now you can see that we fade in. Maybe that's a little bit too fast. Maybe we can drag the keyframe a little bit, maybe to 0.30. Okay, that's pretty nice. We can get out of the recording mode now, and if we go to the animator, we can see that now we have our fade in animation, but it's separate from everything. So we know that if we start the game, we're gonna fade out, but then what about this fade in? How do we access this fade in? So the way to do it is to actually, let me do this a little bit bigger. We actually right click where it says fade out, and we can select make transition. So we can make a transition to fade in, and now we will be able to transition to fade in, but only when we specify it. So here, this white line over here is the transition. So if you click on it, you can see some specifications, some fields here in the inspector. And what we're going to do is that we're going to uncheck has exit time, because we don't want to wait any amount of seconds to go from fade out to fade in. We want to do it immediately. So let's uncheck fixed duration, and the transition duration, set it to 0. So we immediately go to fade in when we set the trigger, and now we have to create a trigger to go from fade out from this state to this one. Okay, so we're gonna create it from here where it says parameters. So here on the left it says layers and parameters, so make sure you're in parameters and click this plus sign over here, and we're gonna set it to trigger, and we're gonna call this trigger fade out. So this is gonna be our trigger. So now if we play the game, we can see that the game fades out, and if we activate this trigger, this fade out trigger, what should happen is that the fade in activates, but we haven't set this trigger yet. We have created the trigger, but to actually set this trigger, we have to go here in the inspector where it says conditions and click this plus sign, and now we can select from the list of triggers. When we only have one trigger so far, fade out. So now if we hit play, you can see that fade out activates, and if we hit the trigger, now fade in activates. But as you can see, fade in is a loop, and we don't want fade in to be a loop. We just want it to run once. We want the animation of fade in to run once. So double click fade in and uncheck loop time. Now if we hit play, we should see that everything works properly. We fade out, we set the trigger, and we fade in, and that's it. All right, so we have successfully defined the behavior for the black fade. Now the only thing that we need to do is that we need to call this trigger from the code. So to do that, we're going to create a behavior. So we're going to create a behavior for the black fade. So we're going to check basically that if we're going to check if we are in the menu scene, we want to go to the, what we want to do is that we want to go to the next scene, to the game scene, and if we are in the game scene, we want to go to the menu scene, and we do that by defining a behavior for the black fade. So let's do that. Let's go to the project view, and let's go to our scripts, and in our scripts we're going to create a new folder, and this folder we're going to call it animations, and inside the animations folder we're going to create a new script. And this C# script, we're gonna call it black fade, capital B, black fade, like this. We're gonna open the script, and inside the black fade, we're gonna delete all of this because we don't need it. We're gonna create a method. It doesn't have to be public, so we're gonna just say void, and we say on black fade finishes. So this means that when the black fade finishes, we want something to happen. So when this method is going to be called when the black fade finishes. So when the black fade finishes, we want to either go to the menu scene if we're in the game scene, or to go to the game scene if we're in the menu scene. So in here we're going to check, and to check if we're in one scene or the other scene, we need to import the library using Unity Engine .scene management. Okay, so now we can check. We can say if scene manager dot get active scene dot name equals menu. So if the scene we are in is the menu scene, we want to actually load the next scene, which is the game scene. So scene manager dot load scene, we're gonna load the game scene. Else, if scene manager dot get active scene dot name equals game, and if we're in the game scene and we press the menu button, we want to go to the menu. So scene manager dot load scene menu, like this. Okay, so now that we have defined this script, let's go back to the Unity editor, save the script, go back to the Unity editor, and attach this black fade script to the black fade object. Alright, so now we have our black fade script with our attached to our black fade object. So what do we do now? We have everything set up. What should we do right now? Okay, so right now what we have to do is that we need to so what we need to do right now is that we actually need to do some adjustments to the animations. Okay, so when we fade in, when we fade out, that's normal because that's gonna happen when we enter the scene. But we want to activate this method, this on black fade finished, when we fade out. Okay, so let's select our fade out animation, and in our fade out animation, what we want to do is that when we finish, so let's move the fade in. Okay, so when we fade in, when we finish the fade in animation, what we want to do is that we want to add an event here in the last keyframe when we finish the animation. So to add an event, go over here, and you can see that there's like a stick, like a small stick with a plus sign, and click it. And now you can see that if you move the white line to the side, you can see that here in the last keyframe there's like a blue stick, or something like similar to that, a blue thin stick, and this is an event. So if you click on the event here in the inspector, you can see that there it says animation event, and it says function, no function selected. So we have to select a function from here, and the function that we can select from here is the one that is in the script of the black fade. So here you can see the only function that we have declared, which is on black fade finished. Select it. And now that we have selected it, now if we press play, we can see that we fade out and it should fade in. For some reason it doesn't fade in. Okay, so the reason why it doesn't fade in is because we need to actually call the trigger. So we have done everything right. We have done everything right, but we need to call this trigger, this fade out. Sorry, it's not fade out, it's fade in. So let me call it the way I'm supposed to call it, fade in. Okay, so we want to call this trigger fade in because we want to fade in. So the way to do it is to go to our menu manager, and in our menu manager, when we, instead of saying scene manager.load scene game scene, what we're going to do is that we're going to comment this out because we don't want to do this. And what we actually want to do is to call the trigger of the black fade animator. But to call the trigger, first of all we need, as you can imagine, a reference of the black fade animator. So here we're going to say animator black fade animator, like this, and we're gonna make it public, of course, because we need to set the reference in the inspector. And here we're going to say black fade animator dot set trigger, and inside the parentheses we're going to open quotes and specify the name of the trigger. It's very important that the name of the trigger is the same one that we defined in the animation. Okay, so fade in, because we're going to fade in, not fade out. We're going to fade in. All right, so now everything is set. So now if we hit play, we can see that we fade out in the beginning, and if we hit the play button, we should actually fade in. but we haven't assigned the animator of the black fade to the button. So here, if you select the menu manager, you can see that the black fade is good to make these mistakes, because then you can understand why things happen the way they happen. So now that we have selected the menu manager, we have here the reference for the black fade animation. So just select the black fade object and drag it over here. And now that we have the reference completed, we can actually play the game and it will fade in and go to the next scene. Okay, so now what we can do is, to make things easy, we can go to our prefabs folder and drag this black fade to the prefabs folder, so we can create a prefab of the black fade. And what we can do now is save this scene and go to the game scene, and in the game scene select the prefabs folder and drag the black fade onto the hierarchy of the game scene. And what we're going to do is that we're going to go to Visual Studio, and we're going to go to Game Manager, and when we say on OK button pressed here, we don't want to load the scene. What we actually want to do is that we want to call the animator, we want to set the trigger of the animator of the black fade. So here we're going to just say public animator black fade animator, and now inside the on OK button pressed, we're going to say black fade animator dot set trigger, and we're going to set the trigger to execute the animation. In this case, it's fade in. All right, so we have that set. Let's not forget to select the game manager and set this reference. Okay, so now we have a reference to the animator, and if we hit play, we can see that we fade out. And if we die and we go back to we want to go back to the menu. Okay, so I said on OK button pressed. I made a mistake again. It's not on OK button pressed. It's on. We want to do this over here. When we want to actually go back to the menu. If you knew the mistake that I made, then congratulations. Okay, so like this. Okay, we want to fade in when we go back to the menu. All right, so hit play. Hopefully this time it will work. Okay, so we hit OK, we restart, and then we hit menu. Okay, it says that the parameter fade in does not exist. That's because maybe the way I called it is not like this, with a capital F, but with a lowercase f. Let's see if that was the mistake. Okay, and let's go back to the menu. All right. And if I go back to the menu, you can notice that there's something weird going on, and it's that the ground is not moving. This happens because when we die, when it's game over, and game over is set to true, in the move left script, we said that if game over is equal to false, then we can move. But if game over is equal to true, then we will not be able to move to the left. So the ground, that's why the ground is paralyzed. So the way to solve this is that we're gonna go to the menu manager, and in the start method we're just going to do a quick fix. We're going to say game manager dot game over equals false. All right, so when we execute the menu scene, this start method is going to execute, and it's going to say that game manager dot game over equals false. So then this is going to be true, and we will be able to move the ground to the left. All right, so now if we hit play, we'll see that it's game over. We go back to the menu, and the ground keeps moving. All right, so that was it for this tutorial, for this video, and I'll see you in the next video.